On an apparently peaceful mountain trail, a rich man walks with his 6-year-old daughter and his new girlfriend. The girl jumps happily between the rocks, delighted to have a special moment with her father. In a dangerous section of the trail, the girlfriend takes advantage of a moment of distraction and discreetly pushes the child. The girl falls among the rocks, breaking her arm with an audible crack. "Daddy, help me! My arm hurts so much!" she cries, reaching out toward her father. But the girlfriend whispers something in his ear. "This is our chance. You can finally get rid of this burden." The man looks at his injured daughter and makes the most cowardly decision of his life. He simply walks away, abandoning her in the forest. What they don't realize is that a majestic white horse heard the cries for help. What this animal does next is unbelievable. Before we continue, if you, like us, love animals, please subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss any exciting stories. Thank you. Let's get back to our story. The morning sun painted the mountains in golden hues as Chloe adjusted her small pink backpack and looked up at her father, her eyes shining with happiness. At 6 years old, she had learned to cherish every rare moment Michael dedicated to her, and this day promised to be special. The trail stretched before them like an invitation to adventure, winding between majestic trees and moss-covered rocks. "Daddy, will you teach me the names of the birds today?" she asked, skipping beside him while Vanessa, her father's girlfriend, walked a few steps behind with an expression Chloe couldn't quite decipher. Michael smiled distractedly, checking his cell phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "Sure. Sweetie, let's see what we find along the way." The little girl didn't notice how that smile didn't reach her father's eyes, nor did she see the way Vanessa watched her with a calculating gaze from behind expensive sunglasses. For Chloe, this was simply the most perfect day in the world. She finally had the full attention of the man she loved above all else, even knowing he rarely had time for her. "Look, Daddy, a blue butterfly," she cried, running towards a clearing where sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a magical spectacle. Her small legs moved with the pure energy of childhood, and her laughter echoed through the mountains like music. Vanessa moved closer to Michael, whispering something in his ear that made him frown. Chloe, busy chasing the butterfly, didn't hear the words that sealed her fate at that moment. "You know she'll always be an obstacle between us, don't you? A child demands so much time, so much money." "I don't want to talk about this now," Michael muttered, but Vanessa had already planted the poisonous seed in his weak mind. The trail grew steeper as they climbed, and Chloe began to pant lightly. Her rosy cheeks glistened with tiny beads of sweat, but her enthusiasm remained undiminished. "Daddy, when we get to the top, will you tell me stories about when you were little?" "Maybe," he replied, not truly looking at her. Vanessa observed every interaction with growing impatience. She had invested 2 years of her life in this relationship, carefully calculating every move to win over the wealthy, divorced man. The girl's presence complicated her plans intolerably. A child meant a divided inheritance, divided attention, a life that would never be completely hers. "Chloe, don't run so fast! You could get hurt!" Michael shouted when he saw her venturing near an area where loose rocks dotted the steep path. The girl stopped obediently, waiting for them to catch up. Her large, trusting eyes sought her father's, finding in them an expression she couldn't understand, a mixture of guilt and resignation that foreshadowed the approaching tragedy. "I'm always careful, Daddy. You taught me to be brave, remember?" she said, holding out her little hand to him. For a moment, Michael hesitated. There was something in the purity of that gesture, in the absolute trust his daughter placed in him that touched a hidden part of his conscience. But Vanessa strategically positioned herself beside him, her long red-painted fingers finding his, whispering again poisonous words that tainted any trace of fatherhood still remaining in his corrupted heart. The mountain wind seemed to whisper omens as the three continued upward, Chloe ahead with her innocent joy, unaware that each step brought her closer to a moment that would change her life forever. The stones beneath her small feet seemed to tell an ancient story of betrayal and abandonment, echoing with the somber sound of approaching destiny. The hike continued under the increasingly strong sun, and Chloe often stopped to admire small wildflowers sprouting among the rocks. Her natural curiosity made her question everything: why some rocks were darker, how birds knew to build such perfect nests if the clouds had different names. Each question was asked with eyes shining with genuine interest, but Michael responded, more and more mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Vanessa, have you hiked this trail before?" Chloe asked, trying to include her father's girlfriend in the conversation. There was something about the woman that intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way her lips curved into a smile that never seemed real, or how her eyes remained cold even when she said kind things. "A few times," Vanessa replied, adjusting her sunglasses. "It's a very secluded place, perfect for those who want privacy." Chloe didn't catch the sinister tone behind those words, but Michael seemed to understand perfectly. Vanessa had chosen this trail carefully, a less popular route, far from the prying eyes of other hikers, where accidents could happen without inconvenient witnesses. "Daddy, are you okay?" "You look worried," Chloe observed, her childlike sensitivity picking up on the changes in her father's mood. "I'm just tired, sweetie. Work has been tough lately." It was a partial lie. Michael was exhausted, but not from work. He was exhausted from trying to balance Vanessa's constant demands with his daughter's needs. The woman beside him had become increasingly possessive, increasingly insistent about their future together, and increasingly clear about what she considered obstacles to be removed. During a water break, Chloe wandered a few feet away to explore an interesting rock formation. Vanessa seized the opportunity to intensify her psychological manipulation. "You see how she consumes all your energy?" she whispered, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "When was the last time we had a moment just for us? When was the last time you could focus on your dreams, on our plans?" Michael drank water slowly, avoiding looking in his daughter's direction. "She's just a child, Vanessa. She needs attention. She has nannies, she has school, she has other people who can take care of her. You've already sacrificed so much. Your previous marriage, your plans to travel the world, your freedom. Don't you think you deserve to be happy?" Every word was calculated to hit Michael's weak spots: his selfish nature, his tendency to shirk responsibilities, his deep desire for an uncomplicated life. Vanessa had studied this man for 2 years, mapping every weakness, every insecurity, every secret desire. "Daddy, come see, there's a bird's nest here," Chloe shouted, waving enthusiastically. But Michael didn't move. Instead, he watched his daughter with an expression that was slowly transforming into something darker. Vanessa noticed the change and smiled with satisfaction. Her poisons were finally taking effect. "She'll never stop depending on you," Vanessa continued, her voice now more insistent. "She'll grow up, but she'll always need money, help, your attention. And when we have our own children, how will you divide your love, your time, your inheritance?" The mention of other children hit Michael like a punch. Vanessa had touched on his greatest fear, the idea that Chloe would always be entitled to half of everything he owned, limiting any future he might build with his new partner. Chloe returned, running, unable to contain her excitement. There weren't any birds in the nest, but there were 3 little blue eggs. Will they turn into real birds? "Of course, sweetie," Michael replied automatically, but his voice sounded distant, strange. Vanessa positioned herself beside him, her hand finding his in a seemingly affectionate gesture, but one that was actually possessive, territorial. "Some eggs never hatch," she said, looking directly at Chloe. "Nature has ways of dealing with excesses." Chloe frowned, not understanding the subtext of that conversation, but feeling a strange tension in the air. "What are excesses?" "Nothing important, kiddo," Michael murmured, but something in his voice had definitively changed. Vanessa's words had found fertile ground in his weak soul, and the seeds of evil were germinating rapidly. As they resumed their hike, Vanessa smiled inwardly. She knew she was succeeding. She could see in Michael's eyes that he was beginning to see his daughter not as a blessing, but as a burden. All that remained was to find the perfect moment to act. The trail had become significantly more dangerous. Loose rocks were scattered across the steep path, and small precipices punctuated the right side of the narrow passage. Chloe, however, seemed completely oblivious to the danger, focused only on the joy of being with her father and the wild beauty surrounding her. "Look at that view," she exclaimed, pointing to the valley stretching below them, a green tapestry, dotted with small streams glistening like silver under the sun. "It's like something out of a fairy tale." Her ability to find magic in everything around her was one of Chloe's most striking characteristics. Even when her father worked late and she was left alone with the nanny, she managed to create fantastic stories about her toys, transforming loneliness into adventure. It was a natural resilience that protected her from fully perceiving the emotional neglect she was a victim of. "Fairies don't exist, Chloe," Vanessa said with a smile that didn't hide her irritation. "You're old enough to stop with these childish fantasies." But Daddy always said we should keep our imagination alive," Chloe replied, looking to Michael for support. Michael avoided his daughter's gaze. During the first few years of her life, after his wife's death, he had indeed encouraged her creativity, her stories, her imaginary worlds. It had been a way to cope with his own pain, seeing the girl's purity and joy as a balm for his wounded soul. But now, under Vanessa's constant influence, those same qualities seemed like signs of immaturity that bothered him. "Maybe it's a time for you to grow up a little," he muttered, and Chloe felt something strange tighten in her chest. "I am growing up, Daddy. My teacher said I read very well for my age, and I help tidy my room by myself now." Vanessa laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the mountains. "Reading children's books and tidying a room isn't really growing up. Real growing up means understanding that not everything in life is a fairy tale." Chloe frowned, trying to understand why the conversation had taken such a strange turn. There was a tension in the air she couldn't identify, a feeling that something important was happening, but that remained just beyond her childish comprehension. "Vanessa's right," Michael said, finally looking at his daughter. "You need to learn that life is full of disappointments, that people can't always be there for you." The words hit Chloe like small stones. She stopped walking, her large eyes filling with confusion. "But you'll always be here for me, right, Daddy? You promised when Mommy went to heaven?" The silence that followed was deafening. Michael swallowed hard, vaguely remembering that promise, made years ago when he held a 3-year-old Chloe who cried for her lost mother. At the time, the words had come out naturally, a reflection of the genuine paternal love that still existed in his heart. "Promises sometimes change," he said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. Chloe felt the world tremble around her. At 6, she couldn't articulate the concept of betrayal, but her small heart recognized the pain those words brought. It was as if a fundamental part of her reality was being questioned. "I don't understand," she whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Vanessa watched the interaction with ill-disguised satisfaction. It was working exactly as she'd planned, gradually breaking the emotional bonds between father and daughter before the final act. The less Michael felt connected to the girl, the easier it would be to convince him to do the unthinkable. "That's just life, sweetie," Vanessa said, feigning kindness. "People have to make choices, And sometimes those choices mean leaving some things behind. Chloe looked between her father and Vanessa, her childish mind desperately trying to find an explanation that made sense. She couldn't understand why this day, which had started so perfectly, was becoming so confusing and painful. "But I promised Mommy I'd be a good girl," she said, her small voice breaking a little. "I promised I'd take care of Daddy and make him happy." It was a devastating revelation. A 6-year-old child carrying the emotional burden of caring for her father, of trying to fill the void left by her lost mother. Michael felt a pang of guilt, but Vanessa quickly seized the moment of vulnerability. "See," she whispered to Michael. "Even she knows she's a burden. A child shouldn't feel responsible for an adult's happiness. That's not healthy." And so, Chloe's innocent words were twisted and used against her, transforming her natural kindness into another weapon in Vanessa's arsenal of manipulation. The perfect moment to act was fast approaching. The atmosphere among the three had changed drastically. Chloe now walked a few steps ahead, her small shoulders hunched under the weight of a sadness she couldn't fully comprehend. The initial enthusiasm of the morning had dissipated like mist in the sun, replaced by a strange sense of loss she had never experienced before. "Is Daddy mad at me?" she asked, turning suddenly to look at Michael. Her cheeks were still damp from recent tears, and there was a vulnerability in her eyes that would have touched any heart still retaining a fragment of humanity. "I'm not mad, Chloe, just tired." Michael's response sounded automatic, devoid of any genuine warmth. Vanessa walked beside him, occasionally brushing her hand against his, a constant reminder of her presence and her promises of an uncomplicated future. She had studied psychology in college before deciding that hunting rich men would be more lucrative than an academic career, and she knew perfectly well which psychological buttons she needed to push. "You notice how she always makes everything about herself," Vanessa whispered, low enough for Chloe not to hear. "Even when you're clearly upset, she wants your attention, your energy. It's almost selfish, don't you think?" Chloe had stopped again, this time fascinated by a small waterfall cascading among the rocks. The crystal-clear water formed a tiny natural pool where small silver fish swam in circles. It was a simple but magical sight, exactly the kind of discovery that would normally fill her with joy. "Look, there are little fish here," she called out, but her voice lacked its earlier animation. It was as if a part of her spirit had been wounded, even without her understanding how or why. "Very interesting," Michael replied mechanically, without even glancing in the direction of the waterfall. Vanessa smiled coldly. She could sense that Michael was almost at the emotional breaking point she needed. Years of subtle manipulation had prepared this moment. She had planted seeds of doubt about his fatherhood, about his sacrifices, about the price he paid for having a daughter. Now all it took was a final nudge. "You know, honey," she said, her voice taking on a syrupy, persuasive tone, "I was thinking about our conversation yesterday, about moving to Europe, starting a new life together." Michael nodded distractedly. It was a dream Vanessa had carefully cultivated in him. The fantasy of starting over on another continent, far from the responsibilities and painful memories that tied him there. "Just imagine," she continued, "waking up in Paris, having breakfast overlooking the Eiffel Tower, no worries, no complications tying us to the past." Chloe, who was trying to count how many little fish she could see in the natural pool, didn't notice the sinister tone of the conversation. But something in her childish instinct made her look back, and she saw the expression on her father's face, a mixture of desire and something darker that frightened her. "Daddy, you're not going to leave me, are you?" she asked suddenly, her voice small but clear. The question hung in the air like an arrow, creating a tense silence between the adults. Vanessa quickly positioned herself beside Michael, her hand finding his in a possessive gesture. Why would a little girl like you worry about that? Vanessa answered instead of Michael. Children should think about children's things, toys, cartoons, not adult worries. Because I love my daddy, Chloe replied with devastating simplicity. And he's all I have. The brutal honesty of that statement should have touched Michael deeply. Instead, influenced by months of Vanessa's psychological conditioning, he only felt the weight of responsibility like a chain around his neck. See what I mean, Vanessa whispered in his ear. She can't imagine life without you controlling every aspect of it. It's an unhealthy dependence. It's not fair to you, and it's definitely not healthy for her. Chloe turned her attention back to the fish, but a part of her remained alert, sensing that something fundamental was changing between them. She couldn't name the feeling, but it was as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet, as if the security she had always taken for granted was slowly dissolving. The trail ahead became even more treacherous, with loose stones and a steep drop just to the right. Vanessa surveyed the landscape with calculating eyes, noting how easy it would be for someone small and inattentive to slip and fall. A terrible accident, but completely plausible. The moment she had carefully planned for months was finally within her grasp. Chloe remained fascinated by the small waterfall, oblivious to the sinister transformation occurring behind her. She knelt carefully at the edge of the natural pool and reached out her little hand to try and touch the crystal-clear water. The silver fish darted away quickly, creating small ripples on the surface that reflected the sunlight like liquid diamonds. "They're afraid of me," she observed sadly. "I just wanted to be their friend." The innocent statement echoed in the air with a cruel irony that only the adults could perceive. Vanessa smiled with satisfaction. Even the girl's casual words seemed to confirm her philosophy that trust was synonymous with weakness. "Some beings are made to flee, Chloe," Vanessa said, her voice laden with double meaning. "It's survival instinct. The smart ones know when to get away from dangerous situations." Michael remained silent, watching his daughter with an increasingly distant expression. In his mind, the poisonous seeds planted by Vanessa were germinating rapidly. He began to see every affectionate gesture from Chloe as childish manipulation, every need of hers as a chain binding him to a life he no longer desired. "Daddy, can you come here? I want to show you how the water makes a different sound when it hits the bigger rocks," Chloe called, her voice full of the persistent hope that characterized her resilient nature. "I'm watching from here, Chloe," he replied coldly. The rejection hit the girl like a slap. She stood up slowly, wiping her wet hands on her small jeans, and looked at her father with an expression of profound confusion. At 6, she couldn't comprehend how the man who had hugged her affectionately that morning was transforming into a cold, distant stranger. "You're different today, Daddy," she said, her voice small but determined. "Did something bad happen?" Vanessa seized the opportunity to intensify her manipulation. "Sometimes adults get tired of pretending, Chloe, tired of smiling when they're not happy, of saying everything's fine when it's not." "But I'm not making anyone pretend," Chloe protested, tears starting to well up in her eyes again. "I just want my daddy to be truly happy." "And what if the only way for him to be truly happy was if you weren't always around?" Vanessa asked, her voice soft but cruel as a sharpened blade. The question hit Chloe with devastating force. Her childish mind couldn't fully process the cruelty behind those words, but her heart felt the impact like a deep wound. She looked at her father, desperately seeking some sign that this wasn't true. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. Michael avoided his daughter's eyes. Somewhere deep in his conscience, a voice tried to scream that this was wrong, that he was being manipulated, that he was about to destroy something precious and irreparable. But Vanessa's voice was stronger, more persistent, more seductive in its promises of freedom. Maybe, he muttered. Maybe it would be better for all of us if things were different. Chloe recoiled, as if she had been physically struck. Her small hands trembled, and she hugged herself in an instinctive gesture of protection. "You don't want me anymore?" she asked, her voice so low it almost got lost in the sound of the waterfall. "It's not a matter of wanting or not wanting," Michael said, repeating the words Vanessa had carefully planted in his mind over months of conditioning. "It's a matter of practicality." Vanessa watched Chloe's emotional destruction with cold satisfaction. The girl was being systematically broken, prepared for the final blow that would come soon. The more emotionally devastated she was, the less likely anyone would question a tragic accident. "I can be more practical," Chloe said desperately, trying to find a solution to a problem her childish mind couldn't fully comprehend. "I can eat less, talk less, not ask for so many things. I can be the daughter you want me to be." The girl's words should have broken any father's heart. Instead, Michael felt only irritation. Irritation that she didn't understand. He simply didn't want to be a father anymore. Didn't want any more responsibilities. Didn't want anything that prevented him from living the free, uncomplicated life Vanessa had promised. The trail continued steeply ahead, and Vanessa noted they were approaching the most dangerous section, where the rocks became looser and the drop-off to the side more pronounced. It was almost time to put her plan into action. "Let's keep going," she said, her voice seemingly normal, but her eyes glinting with malicious anticipation. "We don't want to be late." Chloe wiped her eyes and obediently rejoined them, but something fundamental had broken within her. For the first time in her life, she began to question whether the love she felt was reciprocated, whether her existence truly brought joy to the people she loved. The most dangerous section of the trail stretched before them, like an ominous challenge. The path had narrowed drastically, with only about 6 feet of width between the rock wall on the left and a dizzying precipice on the right. Loose stones rolled underfoot with every step, creating small rock slides that echoed into the chasm below. It was exactly the kind of place where tragic accidents could happen without anyone questioning the circumstances. Chloe now walked in silence, her steps small and careful. The infectious joy that had characterized the beginning of the hike had completely vanished, replaced by a melancholy caution that seemed strange in such a young child. Her eyes, once bright with enthusiasm, now watched the ground with a sadness that would have touched something primal and instinctive in any observer, except for the 2 adults walking behind her. "Watch your step, Chloe," Michael said, but there was a coldness in his voice that transformed the warning into something that sounded more like irritation than genuine concern. "I am being careful, Daddy," she replied softly, without looking back. Vanessa watched the girl's every move with the patience of a predator studying its prey. She had waited months for this moment, the perfect combination of isolation, dangerous terrain, and a Michael psychologically prepared to accept. The unthinkable. Her years of meticulous planning were about to bear fruit. "Michael," she whispered, positioning herself strategically beside him, "you know that after today, our life can finally truly begin, don't you?" He nodded distractedly, watching his daughter. Ahead, something deep in his conscience tried to sound an alarm, an ancestral voice of paternal protection screaming that this was wrong. But months of psychological conditioning had created an almost impenetrable barrier around that voice, muffling it under layers of carefully cultivated resentment. "I keep thinking," Vanessa continued, her voice low but laden with insinuation, "how different it would be if we didn't have responsibilities tying us to the past." Chloe had stopped a few yards ahead, fascinated by a peculiar rock formation jutting out from the mountain wall. It was a perfect distraction. She was turned away from them, focused on her exploration, completely vulnerable. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing to some markings on the stone. "They look like ancient drawings, like someone told a story on the rock." It was typical of Chloe to find magic even in the darkest moments. Her ability to discover beauty and mystery in the world around her had always been one of her most charming characteristics. Now, ironically, it would be this same natural curiosity that would put her in mortal danger. "Very interesting," Michael muttered, but his eyes weren't focused on his daughter's discovery. Instead, he observed her position, how close she was to the edge, how a small disturbance could easily... "It's now," Vanessa whispered, so low only Michael could hear. "This is our chance, our only chance to have the life we've always dreamed of." Michael felt his heart race. A part of him knew exactly what Vanessa was suggesting, and the horror of that realization should have made him recoil. Instead, he found himself considering the possibility with a coldness that would have frightened him if he was still capable of genuine self-reflection. "She trusts you completely," Vanessa continued, her voice like sweet poison. "It would be quick, no suffering, and then we could finally be free." Chloe turned to them, her eyes still moist but trying to force a smile. "Do you want to see up close? It's really cool." The absolute innocence in her voice, the blind trust she still placed in her father, despite everything that had happened, should have been enough to break the evil spell Vanessa had cast over Michael. Instead, he felt only a cold determination settling in his chest. "Sure, sweetie," he said, starting to move towards her. "Let's see this amazing discovery." Vanessa smiled. A smile that didn't come close to her cold eyes. Everything was aligning perfectly. Chloe was positioned exactly where she needed to be, her back to them, close enough to the edge that a calculated push would look like a terrible accident. "She really found something special," Vanessa commented, her voice laden with double meaning as they approached the innocent girl. Chloe, completely oblivious to the approaching danger, continued to point enthusiastically at the markings. On the rock, her voice full of the persistent hope of regaining her father's loving attention. She had no idea she was about to become the victim of the cruelest betrayal a child could experience. The moment of truth had arrived, and Chloe's fate was literally on the edge of a cliff. Vanessa positioned herself strategically behind Chloe, her eyes calculating with millimeter precision the angle and force needed. The girl continued to point enthusiastically at the markings on the rock, completely absorbed in her discovery, when Vanessa seized a moment when Michael was looking away, and acted with a seemingly casual movement, as if she were just trying to get closer to see better. Vanessa extended her hand and pushed Chloe in the back. It wasn't an obviously violent push. Any casual observer might interpret it as an accident, an unfortunate stumble, but it was calculated with the precision of someone who had rehearsed that moment mentally hundreds of times. Chloe felt the world spin around her. 1 second, she was admiring the ancient markings on the stone, desperately trying to regain her father's loving attention, and the next, she was falling among the jagged rocks protruding from the steep slope. Her cry of surprise and terror echoed through the mountains like the wail of a wounded bird. The sound of the impact was sickeningly audible, first her small body hitting a rocky outcrop, then the sharp, terrible crack of her arm breaking as she tried to cushion the fall. Chloe tumbled several feet among the stones before managing to grab onto a sturdy root that stopped her from falling further into the abyss. "Daddy!" she screamed, her voice breaking with pain and panic. "Daddy! Help me!" For a moment, just one moment, Michael felt his paternal instinct awaken. He saw his small, injured daughter, heard her desperate cries, and something primitive and powerful in his DNA screamed for him to act, to save her. He took a step towards the edge, ready to climb down and rescue his girl. But Vanessa was faster. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength and whispered urgently in his ear, "This is our chance, Michael, our only chance to be free. No one will know what happened here. It was a terrible accident, but now you can finally live the life you've always wanted." "She's hurt," Michael muttered, but his voice already lacked its initial determination. "Daddy, please, my arm, it hurts so much," Chloe cried, trying to position herself better on the rocky ledge where she had landed. She could see blood on her arm, and the pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, sharp, constant, terrifying. "And what if she survives?" Vanessa continued, her voice low but insistent. "What if someone finds her? She'll tell everyone you abandoned her. Your reputation, your career, everything will be ruined. But if you leave here now, with me, you can claim she got lost, that you searched for her for hours before calling for help." Chloe managed to turn enough to see her father at the edge of the cliff above. Her small eyes, filled with tears and pain, met his across the distance that separated them. "Daddy, don't leave me here. I promise I'll be a good girl. I promise I won't be a bother anymore." Those words, a 6-year-old's desperate promise to be good to earn her own father's love, should have shattered any hesitation Michael still had. Instead, he looked at Vanessa, saw the life of freedom she promised, and made the most cowardly and cruel decision of his existence. "Let's go," he said, his voice sounding strange and distant even to himself. "Daddy, no, don't leave me." Chloe's scream echoed through the mountains with an agony that touched even the wild animals nearby. Birds flew startled from their trees, and an unnatural silence settled over the forest, as if nature itself was shocked by the cruelty it had witnessed. Michael took Vanessa's hand and began to walk away. Each step was like a stab to any vestige of humanity still remaining in his soul, but he kept walking, guided by the whispered promises of a new life, free of responsibilities. "Daddy, come back! I love you! Please!" Chloe screamed until her voice grew hoarse, but the figures above her grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely around the bend in the trail. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe was left alone on the rocky ledge, her broken arm throbbing with pain, blood slowly drying on her wounds, facing for the first time in her life the complete and incomprehensible abandonment by the one she loved most in the world. But in a nearby clearing, a majestic white horse raised its head upon hearing the cries for help echoing through the mountain, its intelligent eyes fixed on the direction of the sound, and something deep in its noble nature stirred. Abandoning its peaceful grazing, the animal began to move with determination towards the source of that desperate cry. The true hero of the story was about to enter the scene. The pain in her arm was like fire running through her veins, but Chloe forced herself to remain still on the rocky ledge. Her tears had dried, leaving salty tracks on her cheeks, dirty with earth and blood. The sun was beginning to dip in the sky, and she knew instinctively that night was approaching, a night she would have to face alone, abandoned, injured, and confused. "Mommy," she whispered into the void, her voice small and broken. "Why did Daddy leave me? I promised I'd be a good girl." It was then she heard a different sound, not the empty echo of her own voice, but something moving through the vegetation above. Small stones rolled down the slope, and she could hear a kind of heavy, rhythmic breathing. For a moment, her heart leapt with hope. Maybe her father had come back. Maybe he had realized his terrible mistake. But when a head appeared at the edge of the cliff, it wasn't human. It was a magnificent horse, its coat as white as fresh snow, and dark eyes that seemed profoundly intelligent. The animal observed her for a long moment, as if assessing the situation, before carefully starting to descend the steep slope. Chloe remained motionless, partly afraid, partly fascinated. There was something about the horse that was different. from any animal she had ever encountered. Its movements were deliberate, almost human in their intention, and its eyes seemed to understand exactly what had happened. Did you come to help me?" she asked, her voice a whisper of awe. The horse descended with impressive care, choosing each step with precision to avoid causing more rock slides. When it finally reached the ledge where Chloe was stranded, it was too large to stand completely on the small rock platform, but it positioned itself so it could gently nuzzle her. Chloe reached out her good hand and touched the animal's soft muzzle. It was warm and comforting, and for the first time since the fall, she didn't feel completely alone. "You won't leave me too, will you?" she asked, her words laden with all the betrayal and abandonment she had experienced. As if understanding her question perfectly, the horse lowered its head and leaned gently against her, offering the physical comfort no human had given her that terrible day. Chloe wrapped her good arm around the animal's neck and cried, no longer from physical pain, but from a deep relief at not being utterly abandoned. The animal seemed to assess her injuries with intelligent eyes. It could see the broken arm, the scrapes and cuts, and clearly understood she needed medical help, but it also seemed to understand that moving her at that moment would be dangerous. Instead, the horse positioned itself strategically, using its large, warm body to shield her from the wind that was beginning to blow stronger as night approached. Its presence was more than physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a silent but powerful affirmation that she had value, that she deserved protection and care. "How did you know I was here?" Chloe whispered, stroking the animal's silky neck. "It's like you're an angel." The word angel echoed down the rocky slope, and for the first time since she had been abandoned, Chloe felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. Maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. Maybe there were still beings capable of genuine kindness. As night fell, the horse remained steadfast beside her, occasionally readjusting its position to offer better protection from the elements. Chloe managed to fall asleep briefly, lulled by the animal's warmth and the rhythmic sound of its breathing. But even in her restless dreams, she could hear echoes of the cries she had uttered earlier. "Daddy, don't leave me." Words that would echo in her memory long after the physical wounds had healed. Throughout the night, the horse remained vigilant, its keen senses alert to any danger. It was as if it had taken full responsibility for the safety of this abandoned child, a responsibility her own father had cruelly rejected. When the first ray of sunrise touched the slope, Chloe awoke to find the horse still beside her, its gentle eyes watching her with evident concern. The pain in her arm was still intense, but the animal's presence had transformed her utter despair into something that felt almost like hope. "Thank you for staying with me," she whispered, and the horse responded with a soft nicker that sounded almost like a promise that it would never abandon her as humans had done. While Chloe spent her first terrifying night on the mountain under the protection of the white horse several miles away, Michael parked his car in front of the local sheriff's department. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but not from remorse. It was pure nervousness about the performance he was about to give. Vanessa leaned towards him, adjusting her own appearance in the rearview mirror to ensure she looked suitably distraught. "Remember," she whispered, "we searched for her for hours. You're devastated. It's your worst nightmare as a father." "I know what to do," Michael muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. They entered the station hand in hand, Vanessa immediately assuming the role of a supportive, worried girlfriend. Michael approached the front desk with an expression he had rehearsed in the mirror, a carefully calibrated mixture of panic and paternal despair. "My daughter," he said, his voice breaking convincingly. "My 6-year-old daughter disappeared. On the Eagles Peak Trail, we've been looking for her for hours, but..." The officer on duty, a middle-aged man named Sergeant Miller, immediately straightened up. Cases involving missing children always received top priority. "When did you last see her?" "This morning, around 10 o'clock, Michael replied, the words flowing with disturbing ease. "She was exploring an area near a small waterfall. We told her not to wander off, but you know how kids are. When we realized she was no longer there." Vanessa placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, perfectly playing the part of a woman trying to console a desperate father. "He's blaming himself," she said, her voice laced with feigned concern. "But it was no one's fault. Little children can get lost so easily on those trails." Sergeant Miller began filling out a report, asking questions about Chloe's appearance, what she was wearing, her general behavior. Michael answered everything with convincing detail. After all, he knew his daughter better than anyone in the world, even though he had chosen to abandon her. "She was wearing a pink t-shirt with a unicorn, blue jeans and white sneakers," he said, and the specificity of the details lent credibility to his story. "She's a very curious girl, always exploring, always asking questions." "Did you check all the nearby areas? Did you call out for her?" "For hours," Vanessa lied smoothly. "We shouted her name until we were hoarse. We checked every side trail, every possible hiding spot. That's when we decided we needed professional help." While Michael provided false details about their search efforts, a real rescue team was being mobilized. Experienced volunteers, search dogs, mountaineering experts, all preparing to risk their own lives to find a girl whose parents had deliberately abandoned her to die. "Is there anything else we should know about Chloe?" the sergeant asked. "Any medical issues, any special conditions?" Michael hesitated for a moment, a real hesitation, because for the first time since they had left the mountain, he was forced to think of Chloe as a real person, not just as an obstacle to be removed. She's very confident," he said finally, "very brave, sometimes too brave." It was true. Chloe had always been fearless, always willing to explore and discover. This same courage that Michael had once admired in his daughter now became, in his twisted mind, further evidence that she was reckless, problematic. "Don't worry, sir," Sergeant Miller said with genuine conviction. "We'll find your daughter. We have the best search and rescue team in the state. If she's out there, we'll bring her home." The word home hit Michael like a punch. For a moment, just a moment, he managed to see through the fog of manipulation Vanessa had created around his mind. He saw the station full of genuinely concerned people, preparing to risk their lives for a child they didn't know, while he, her father, had deliberately abandoned her to die. But Vanessa sensed his hesitation and quickly squeezed his hand, bringing him back to the distorted reality she had constructed. "We know you'll do everything you can," she said. "Just, please, find her quickly." Michael can barely stand the thought of Chloe out there alone. While they provided false information about where to search for Chloe, deliberately directing the search away from where she actually was, the girl remained on her rocky ledge, protected only by a horse that demonstrated more compassion and loyalty than her own father. The lies Michael was telling at that station not only put Chloe in greater danger, they represented the complete corruption of any vestige of fatherhood that had once existed in his heart. Each false word was another step away from any possibility of redemption. The second day on the mountain brought new challenges for Chloe. Her thirst was constant and painful, and hunger began to manifest as a dull ache in her empty stomach. The broken arm had swollen during the night, and every movement sent waves of agony through her small body. But what worried her most was something she couldn't name, a feeling of fever that made her forehead burn and her vision occasionally blur. The white horse, Spirit, seemed to understand her deteriorating condition perfectly. During the early morning hours, the animal descended further down the slope, carefully exploring the surroundings until it found a small stream running between the rocks. It returned to Chloe and, almost magically, managed to communicate that it had found water. "You want me to go with you?" Chloe asked, her voice hoarse from dehydration. Spirit positioned itself beside the rocky ledge, lowering itself as much as possible. Chloe understood the intention. It wanted her to climb onto its back. It was a dangerous maneuver with only one functional arm, but the need for water overcame her fear. With extreme care and patient help from the animal, Chloe managed to position herself on its back. Spirit moved with extraordinary gentleness, each step calculated not to cause additional pain to the injured girl. When they reached the stream, Chloe drank avidly, the cool water feeling like a divine blessing against her parched throat. It was there, while drinking, that she noticed some wild berries growing on nearby bushes. They were small and dark, and she vaguely remembered her mother saying that dark berries were usually safe to eat. With Spirit's help to reach the higher branches, she managed to collect enough to somewhat alleviate the hunger tormenting her. "You're so smart," she told Spirit, stroking its neck with gratitude. "It's like you know exactly what I need." But the activity had cost precious energy, and Chloe could feel her strength visibly waning. Spirit seemed to realize this too, because it led her back to a more sheltered spot, a small natural cave formed by overlapping rocks where she would be protected from the harsh sun and possible rain. During the hottest hours of the day, Chloe rested in the cool shade of the cave, Spirit strategically positioned at the entrance like a vigilant guardian. It was in these moments of forced stillness that her childish mind tried to process what had happened. "Why did he leave me?" she asked Spirit, her words echoing softly in the small cave. "I always tried to be a good girl. I always did what he asked." Spirit turned its head to look at her, its dark eyes filled with an understanding that seemed almost human. Chloe found comfort in that gaze. It was the first sign of genuine compassion she had received since everything had started to go wrong. "Mommy always said that when people hurt us, it's not because we did something wrong," she continued, her voice small but determined. "It's because they have something broken inside them." It was profound wisdom for a 6-year-old, a reflection of both her naturally resilient nature and the lessons her mother had tried to teach before she was gone forever. Chloe was beginning to understand, in a primitive but real way, that her father's abandonment said more about him than it did about her. As the day wore on, Chloe began to develop a basic survival routine. In the morning, Spirit would take her to the stream for water. During the midday heat, they rested in the cave. In the afternoon, they collected wild berries and carefully explored the area for other resources. But with each passing day, the signs of infection in her broken arm became more evident. The skin around the fracture was red and hot to the touch, and Chloe began to have episodes of fever that made her briefly delirious. During one such episode, on the third night, she began to have imaginary conversations with her deceased mother. "Mommy, I'm trying to be brave like you said," she whispered into the night air. "But it's really hard. And Daddy left me." Spirit moved closer, offering warmth and physical comfort as she battled the fever. There was something almost supernatural in the animal's dedication, as if it had taken on not only the role of protector, but also of family for the abandoned. "Girl, you'll never leave me, will you?" she asked, her small hand resting on Spirit's neck. "You're better than people. You have a real heart." It was a devastatingly astute observation from a child who had learned, in the cruelest way possible, that not all human beings are worthy of the trust we naturally place in them. Dr. Edward Peterson had noticed Spirit's absence on the second morning. The white horse had been his constant companion for over 10 years, ever since he had rescued him from an abusive circus and nursed his physical and emotional wounds. Never, in all those years, had Spirit disappeared for more than a few hours. Edward was a man of 72, retired from veterinary practice for 5 years, but still possessing the energy and determination of someone much younger. He had chosen to live in this isolated cabin in the mountains after losing his granddaughter Lily in a car accident 3 years earlier. The pain of the loss had been so devastating that he had needed to withdraw from civilization to find some peace. "Where are you, old friend?" he murmured, packing a rucksack with supplies for a prolonged search. Dr. Edward Peterson knew these mountains like the back of his hand. He had hiked every trail, explored every valley, mapped every stream during the years of voluntary solitude that followed Lily's tragedy. If Spirit was somewhere out here, he would find him. The horse's tracks were easy to follow initially. The soft ground near the cabin had preserved clear hoof prints. But as Edward ventured into rockier terrain, the clues became harder to trace. Still, his years of experience guided him in the right direction. It was on the afternoon of the 4th day that Edward found the first truly revealing sign. Not Spirit's tracks, but something far more disturbing. There, in a clearing near a rarely used trail, were small personal items clearly belonging to a child. A pink hair tie, a few scraps of paper that looked like they'd come from a school backpack, and more worryingly, a few drops of dried blood on the rocks. "My God," Edward whispered, kneeling to examine the evidence more closely. His experience as a veterinarian had trained him to read subtle signs, and what he saw there told a disturbing story. A child had been in this place, had been injured, and from the blood patterns and the way the objects were scattered, it hadn't been a simple accident. Edward followed the clues with growing urgency. Spirit's tracks became clearer again, showing that the horse had passed repeatedly through this area. There were also signs that something had been dragged or carried, marks on the ground suggesting Spirit had been transporting something heavy. As the sun began to dip in the late afternoon sky, Edward heard something that made his heart race, Spirit's distant whinny. It wasn't a casual sound. It was urgent, almost like a call for help. Edward quickened his pace, following the sound through increasingly difficult terrain. It was when he rounded a rock formation that he finally saw them. Spirit, positioned protectively near a small natural cave, and there, in the cool shade of the rocks, a small girl lay with what was clearly a broken arm. "Jesus Christ," Edward murmured, rushing towards the scene. Chloe was semi-conscious, her forehead burning with fever. The broken arm had developed clear signs of infection. The skin was red, swollen, and hot to the touch. She had lost noticeable weight, and her lips were cracked from dehydration despite Spirit's efforts to lead her to water sources. "Hello, little one," Edward said softly, kneeling beside her. "My name is Edward. I've come to help you." Chloe opened her eyes slowly, her fever-blurred vision struggling to focus on the kind face that had appeared before her. Are you real?" she whispered. "I'm very real," Edward replied, his voice full of compassion. "And from the looks of it, my horse has been taking very good care of you." Spirit came closer, gently nuzzling Edward's head, as if reporting everything that had happened over the past few days. Edward stroked the animal's neck with deep gratitude. "You did very well, old friend," he said to the horse. "You saved her life." Edward quickly assessed Chloe's condition with experienced medical eyes. The infection was advanced, but not irreversible. She was dehydrated and malnourished, but alive, a testament to both her own resilience and the extraordinary protection Spirit had offered. "How did you get here, little one?" Edward asked gently as he prepared a makeshift splint for her arm. Chloe looked at him with eyes that had seen betrayals no child should ever experience. My daddy left me here," she said, her voice small but clear. "He doesn't want me anymore." The words hit Edward like a punch to the gut. In all his years as a veterinarian, he had seen animal cruelty, but the idea of a father deliberately abandoning an injured child was a malice that defied his comprehension. "Well," he said, his voice firm but gentle, "you have someone to look after you now. Both Spirit and I will make sure you're safe." It was a promise Edward would make with all his heart, a promise that would honor Lily's memory and give renewed purpose to his solitary life. Back at Edward's cabin, Chloe lay in a comfortable bed for the first time in a week. The veterinarian had improvised an impressive medical treatment, using his experience with injured animals to care for the girl. The broken arm was properly immobilized. The infection was being fought with antibiotics he kept for veterinary emergencies, and she had been gradually rehydrated and fed. But what impressed Edward most was the girl's emotional resilience. Despite everything she had suffered, Chloe maintained a natural sweetness that deeply touched the old man's heart. Over the 3 days of recovery, she had told her story in fragments, each revelation more disturbing than the last. "Dr. Peterson," Chloe said one sunny morning, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. What do you want to know?" "Why do some people hurt other people, even when they haven't done anything wrong?" The question was so profound and painful that Edward needed a moment to formulate a proper response. "Sometimes," he said finally, "people have broken parts inside them, and when those broken parts control their actions, they do terrible things." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "My mommy always said we should feel sorry for people who are cruel, because they must be very sad inside to want to hurt others." The wisdom of this 6-year-old left Edward speechless. There was an emotional depth to her that was both inspiring and heartbreaking, inspiring for her ability to maintain compassion even after so much betrayal, and heartbreaking because no child should have to develop such understanding of human cruelty. "Your mother was a very wise woman," Edward said, feeling a familiar pang of pain as he thought of Lily, "and she raised a very special daughter." It was at that moment that Edward made a decision that would change both their lives. "Chloe," he said, sitting beside the bed, "I need to take you to the authorities. They need to know the truth about what happened to you." Chloe suddenly grew pale. "Will they make me go back to Daddy?" "No, dear, not if I can help it. But people need to know you were lost, that you're safe. There must be people looking for you." What Edward didn't know was that there was indeed a massive search underway, but in the completely wrong direction, based on Michael's lies. Rescue teams had scoured miles of trails, volunteers had sacrificed days of work, and significant resources had been wasted on an elaborate charade. At the sheriff's department, when Edward arrived carefully carrying Chloe in his arms, Sergeant Miller almost fell out of his chair. "My God, it's her! It's the missing girl!" The news spread quickly. Within minutes, Michael and Vanessa were urgently summoned to the station. They arrived perfectly playing the role of relieved and grateful parents, but Edward noticed something strange in their reaction. An almost imperceptible hesitation, a flash of something that looked more like panic than relief. "Chloe!" Michael exclaimed, rushing towards his daughter. "My darling, you're okay. Daddy was so worried." But Chloe shrank back against Edward, her instinctive reaction revealing more than 1,000 words could express. "I don't want to go with him," she whispered to Edward. "She's still traumatized," Vanessa said quickly, trying to explain Chloe's reaction. Little children sometimes get confused after experiences like this. But Sergeant Miller had worked with children long enough to recognize signs of genuine fear. "Chloe," he said gently, "can you tell me what happened? How did you get to that place where Dr. Peterson found you?" Chloe looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. In a small but clear voice, she began to tell the truth. "My daddy and Vanessa took me to the trail. I was looking at some drawings on a rock when she pushed me." The silence in the station was deafening. Michael turned visibly pale, and Vanessa took a step back, as if wanting to flee. "That's absurd," Vanessa protested. "She's confused, traumatized. Little children make up stories." "But Chloe," continued, her voice gaining strength, "I yelled for Daddy to help me, but he looked at me and walked away. Vanessa said something in his ear, and he left me there." Edward felt a deep, primal anger rising in his chest. He looked at Michael with an expression of disgust that made the man recoil. "That's impossible," Michael stammered. I looked for her." "We looked in the wrong direction," Chloe said simply. "You knew where I was." Sergeant Miller had seen many lies during his career, but Chloe's simple, devastating honesty was unmistakable. Moreover, her story explained inconsistencies in the initial report that had bothered the investigation team. "Mr. Thompson," the sergeant said, his voice now cold and official, "I need you and Ms. Hayes to come with me for a more detailed conversation. Chloe will remain in Dr. Peterson's care until we can fully clarify this situation." It was the moment Edward had hoped for. The moment when the truth finally came to light and justice could begin to be served. But more importantly, it was the moment Chloe was finally truly safe. In the days following the revelation at the sheriff's department, the truth unfolded like an unstoppable avalanche. The official investigation quickly confirmed Chloe's version through physical evidence that Michael and Vanessa hadn't considered in their hasty planning. Trail experts found footprints that corresponded exactly to Chloe's account. Marks showing 3 people walking together to the fatal point and only 2 returning. More damningly, fibers from Chloe's clothing were found on a bush near the site of the fall, proving she had been exactly where she said she was, not in the areas where Michael claimed to have searched for her. Vanessa was the first to break. Under pressure, confronted with irrefutable evidence and the prospect of a severe sentence for attempted murder and child abandonment, she tried to negotiate her freedom by revealing the full details of her psychological manipulation of Michael. "I planned everything," she confessed during interrogation, her mask of charm finally falling away to reveal the calculating coldness beneath. "But he was willing. I just facilitated a decision he already wanted to make." The recordings of Vanessa's interrogation were devastating. She described in clinical detail how she had studied Michael's psychological weaknesses, how she had systematically poisoned his mind against his own daughter, and how she had chosen that specific trail to create the perfect opportunity for the accident. Michael, confronted with Vanessa's confession and the overwhelming weight of the evidence, finally crumbled. But even in his confession, he tried to minimize his responsibility, claiming he had been manipulated, that he wasn't thinking clearly, that he had never truly wanted to hurt Chloe. Throughout this process, Chloe remained in Edward's care, who had applied for temporary custody while the legal proceedings unfolded. The girl demonstrated remarkable emotional recovery, not because she had forgotten the trauma, but because she was finally in an environment where she felt truly loved and protected. "Dr. Peterson," she said one sunny afternoon while brushing. "Spirit, can I call you Grandpa?" The question hit Edward with devastating emotional force. Tears formed in his eyes as he thought of Lily, of how she would have loved to have a little sister like Chloe, of how love can be found in the most unexpected places. "It would be the greatest honor of my life," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. The legal process was swift and definitive. Vanessa Hayes was convicted of attempted murder, child abandonment, and conspiracy. Her 15-year sentence was deemed appropriate by the judge, who noted that only extraordinary luck and Spirit's protection had prevented her from being guilty of murder. Michael Thompson faced charges of criminal abandonment, child neglect, and conspiracy. His sentence was shorter, 8 years, but it came with the permanent loss of all parental rights over Chloe. The judge was particularly harsh in his Comments noting that a father's betrayal of his own daughter represented one of the lowest forms of human cruelty. "You had a choice, Mr. Thompson," the judge said during sentencing, "between protecting an innocent child who trusted you completely and satisfying your own selfish desires. You made the wrong choice so spectacularly that it's hard to comprehend how any humanity remains in your heart." But the real healing for Chloe came not from legal justice, but from the genuine love she found with Edward. The veterinarian immediately began the adoption process, and the entire local community rallied to support the transition. Neighbors who barely knew Edward showed up with toys, clothes, and offers of help. "It's amazing," Sergeant Miller commented, "how a child's goodness can bring out the best in people." Chloe blossomed under Edward's care. Her arm healed completely, but more importantly, her capacity to trust and love strengthened instead of breaking. She started attending the local school, where she quickly became beloved by teachers and classmates for her natural kindness and surprising wisdom. Spirit, of course, became more than a protector. He became her best friend and constant companion. The connection between them remained deep and special, a daily reminder that true love sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. "You know," Chloe said to Edward one evening as they watched Spirit grazing in the field, "I've learned that real family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses to stay when things get tough." Edward smiled, hugging his adopted daughter with all the love he had to give. "You're absolutely right, my dear, and we'll always choose to stay." Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had triumphed over cruelty, and a girl who had lost everything found a family better than anything she had known before. 1 year later, Chloe galloped joyfully on a safe trail near Edward's cabin, riding Spirit as if they were parts of the same being. Her crystal-clear laughter echoed through the mountains, a sound of pure joy that had completely replaced the cries of despair that had once shattered the silence of these same peaks. Her arm had healed perfectly, not just physically, but also emotionally. She no longer felt hesitation in extending it to hug, to explore, to live fully. The scar that remained was small and almost invisible, a subtle mark of her journey that she carried not with shame, but as a reminder of her own strength and resilience. "Grandpa Edward, Grandpa Edward," she cried, guiding Spirit back to where the veterinarian was preparing a picnic on the cabin porch. "Spirit showed me a place where there are flowers I've never seen before." Edward smiled, observing the complete transformation of the girl he had found injured and abandoned a year ago. Chloe had grown not just physically, but emotionally, developing a serene confidence and a genuine joy that radiated to everyone around her. "What kind of flowers?" he asked, delighting in her enthusiasm. "They're yellow like the sun, but with orange edges, and they grow really close to the ground." Spirit knew exactly where they were, like he wanted to show me something special. It was typical of Spirit to continue to surprise Chloe with little discoveries. The horse had become more than a protector or friend. He was her confidant, her adventure companion, and a constant source of magic in her daily life. Edward had formalized the adoption 3 months ago in a simple but profoundly emotional ceremony at the local courthouse. Chloe had chosen to keep her first name, but legally became Chloe Peterson, carrying the surname of the man who had chosen to be her true father. The cabin had been transformed to accommodate their new family life. Chloe's room was filled with books, toys, and drawings she made herself, many of them depicting her and Spirit on imaginary adventures. The walls of the entire house were decorated with her artistic creations, each one radiating the joy and creativity that had flourished under loving care. "You know what, Grandpa?" Chloe said, dismounting from Spirit and running to hug Edward. I was thinking about how bad things sometimes happen to lead us to the good things that were waiting for us. The philosophical depth of the observation impressed Edward, as it always did. Chloe had developed a gentle wisdom about life that was remarkable in someone so young, tempered not with bitterness for what she had suffered, but with gratitude for what she had found. "Do you think that's what happened with us?" Edward asked. "I'm sure of it," she replied with absolute conviction. "If Daddy hadn't left me on the mountain, I never would have met you in spirit, and you're the best family I could ever have." Edward felt tears of gratitude forming in his eyes. Chloe's presence had filled a void in his life he hadn't even known existed. After losing Lily, he thought his days of being a father figure were over forever. Chloe had proven that love can re-emerge in the most unexpected moments. "And I never would have discovered I still had so much love to give," he replied, hugging her tightly. During the picnic, Chloe told elaborate stories about the adventures she and Spirit had imagined, each one filled with the creativity and optimism that characterized her healed personality. She had learned to transform even difficult memories into narratives of overcoming and growth. "Grandpa," she said later while brushing Spirit's coat, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, dear. Sometimes in my prayers, I thank God for the bad thing that happened because it brought me to you both. Is that weird?" Edward smiled, recognizing the spiritual depth Chloe had developed. "It's not weird, my dear. It's a sign that you have a very wise heart." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Chloe approached Spirit and whispered in his ear, as had become her daily custom, "Thank you for never leaving me. You taught me that real family doesn't abandon those they love." Spirit responded with a soft whinny, and Edward watched the scene with profound satisfaction. Here was living proof that genuine love always triumphs over cruelty, that kindness can flourish even in the most arid soils of human betrayal. Chloe had found not only a new family, but had discovered her own strength, her ability to forgive without forgetting, to grow through pain, and to transform trauma into wisdom. She was, in every sense, a survivor who had chosen to thrive. And, in the serene mountains that once witnessed her greatest sorrow, now echoed daily the sounds of her greatest joy, the laughter of a girl loved, protected, and finally home.